Jim Roach was very important to me, and some years ago, my uncle insisted that I write up my life experience in India for his children. So I did, and I had a small section at the very beginning about Jim Roach, and I'm going to read to you a couple of paragraphs from that section, which I should say I shared with him before his death, and he told Michael Hall that it made him blush. Jim Roach was the ultimate teacher. He shared much wisdom with his students, made us think, and inspired us to expand beyond our own experience. For those of us fortunate to stay in touch with this wise man well beyond the end of our classes with him, we had the ultimate guru. When we were young, he guided us to learn more and to use what we learned better. He opened doors to opportunities like the Fulbright program. Then, as we went our own way with careers in such areas as healthcare that were not in his field, he took on a new role. He listened and showed active interest in our careers and our lives. He kept us grounded in our dreams. He has been the greatest cheerleader and the connection with our memories of the heady days of the university exploration. For his female students, he was a man that believed women could do most anything a man could do. He gave us targets that were gender-free, and he probably did not realize how unusual that was for most of us back in 1966. Many people contributed to my well-being, but no one contributed more to my career and professional development than did Jim Roach. Thank you.
My name is Alan Friedman. I teach in the English department here. I hadn't intended to say anything today. I just wanted to be here. But I was not Jim's student. I was not Jim's departmental colleague. I was not even a very close friend. But no one, so far at least, seems to have had the relationship to Jim that I did. He was my boss. 3 years after I got tenure, just 3 years, Jim asked me to be director of Plan 2 here. And I was astonished that he would do that. He saw something in me that I didn't see, I guess. It was a moment of, when things were fraught on this campus. The College of Arts and Sciences had been dismembered into natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, and what we called the grab bag division. It was the Division of General and Comparative Studies, which Jim came to be the dean of. And into it went every program that had no funding. From, Bill, you know all of this, from Plan 2 to ROTC and everything in between. There were about 25 of them. And there was a great fear, I think, on this campus, certainly I felt it, that Plan 2 was on its way out, that it wouldn't survive this dismemberment and its lack of any kind of basis in a college that did have substantial resources. And Jim gave the job of Plan 2 to me, gave me Diane Moss to work with, and between us we somehow stuck it out, and with one other staff person, did everything that was required to keep Plan 2 going. And Jim put that confidence in me, and I was always grateful to him for doing that, and honor his memory.
I'm the aforementioned George Gibbs, and thank you for those kind words, Dr. Smith. I have also not had any intention of speaking here, but I happened to stumble into Dr. Roach's class in about 1957. I didn't know anything about anything, and still know very little about very much. But I had an immediate affinity for him. He was the neatest dresser. I never tied a necktie that I don't think about Dr. Roach, because everything he wore was impeccable. Every time I buy anything, I think about Dr. Roach. From that point forward, I would go by to see him occasionally. We became pretty good friends from my point of view, but it just developed from there. And I remember, even after I took the last government final, we went down to Schultz's, and I was still not legally able to drink beer, but we sat there right next to each other. And I, of course, drank way too much, but he was very indulgent of all that. And when I went into the Navy, I would come back to see him. He always had time. He would put aside whatever work he was doing and listen to whatever I had to say. And for about 40 to 50 years after that, after I went to work for Merrill Lynch, we had a business relationship, but we had a much more important relationship than that. And that was a political debate. I am of a rather conservative nature, as you might imagine, and he is not. But we had talks, we had many lunches together. I would go by his office, he'd come by my office, we'd go to my club, I'd go to his club, and we would talk, and I never, ever think that there was a harsh word between us, while there was many, many disagreements between us. When I retired, I asked him to come to my retirement, and he did, thanks to Dr. Schmidt, who I think sort of twisted his arm to come. But I said that there are 4 people in my life that had the most influence on me. My mother, my wife, Dr. Ernest Walker from the finance department, and the 4th, as you might imagine, was Dr. Roach. He meant so much to me. He enriched my life in ways that only those of us who knew him can imagine. And one other thing, I never called him or referred to him by his first name. He will always be Dr. Roach, my professor.
My name is Michael Hall, and like Helen, I was never a student or a departmental colleague of Jim's. I first got to know him in an organization that Bill Livingston put together and Carl Schmidt kept alive. We called ourselves the Verbophiles. People love words. And Bill Livingston's one of the few people around who was senior to Jim. He came here in the dark ages, I think. Jim and I had an informal bond. I had been in India in World War II and on the Burma front. That was when the Raj was in control of India. But then I'd been brought up reading Kipling and Kim, which took me back and forth across the Great Road. And I think Jim and I bonded on that without really saying so. My wife and I were very privileged to have a social relationship to this man. Gary Freeman has so wisely pointed out. Lived an asymmetrical life, bouncing back and forth between social and solitary. The social part of it was that we found that we could, after our children were no longer available, on Christmas Eve, we had a number of very disparate friends come to dinner. And we often felt the need for a sophisticated, cosmopolitan, single man. And Jim filled that bill superbly. He could make conversation with our Australian friends, with our Dallas financial friends, with anybody, and he loved to come to Christmas Eve dinner. And then on the other side, I talked to Jim about his summer getaway in Switzerland and how I longed to participate in that. My wife and I had been hiking in Switzerland one summer, and it was the next year I found out that Jim went back every summer. He had a hotel at Sils Maria, and it was a distant hotel along a small lake with marvelous hiking trails leading from it. Jim would send out a box of books, a whole crate of books carefully chosen, and it would arrive before him. Then he would go year after year. It was one of those wonderful old world relationships between a patron and the innkeeper, who had a special room for him. He used it every year. He looked forward to that month alone in beautiful countryside, his needs taken care of by a considerate and old world innkeeper, reading his books and taking long walks across the hills above timberline for the most part. Magnificent views. And if you remember Jim, he had those long legs. He was a tall and athletic man. And I could just see him striding along those hiking trails alone and just enjoying every bit of it. I remember very well the spring or early summer when he took that first disastrous fall. He was walking back from his office with an armload of books under his right arm, and he stepped on the yellow painted curb on Inner Campus Drive. It was rounded, and he fell. The whole 6-foot-plus frame fell crashing down, the arm clutching the books and not protecting him, and he smashed his shoulder, ended up in the hospital. I called him when he was in the rehab hospital in Brackenridge. He said he'd really like some fruit. So I brought him over a plate of cheese and grapes and whatever I could find. He never really recovered from that fall. He never regained full control of his arm, so he couldn't drive himself, except in a very limited way around the neighborhood where he lived. You take a man's car away from him, his mobility away from him, and something goes. It was that summer that he had some digestive problem, and he just didn't feel good. And I remember the sadness with which he decided he wouldn't be able to make the trip to Switzerland. And he never went back. And occasionally I would take him over sandwiches and we'd have lunch. But it was the beginning of a downhill slide. Sad, but it was the wonderful memories of the earlier years. I'll never forget them. Thank you.